Why do we run from conflict? In an age obsessed with emotional comfort, social media diplomacy, and the constant mask of harmony, conflict seems like an evil to be avoided at all costs. But what if it's exactly the opposite? What if conflict is the only path to true personal transformation? The provocation that opens this video is straightforward. What would Niccolo Machiavelli say to Friedrich Nietzsche about the value of conflict in modern life? What would the strategist of realist politics say to the philosopher of the will to power? This video is not a defense of chaos, nor an invitation to violence. It's a dive into the backstage of human morality, where conflict ceases to be an obstacle and becomes a catalyst. Conflict as a confrontation with the truth. Conflict as an instrument of power. Conflict as a tool for self-knowledge. The question that remains is, who are we when we are at war? Not just with others, but with the world, with ideas, and most importantly, with ourselves. Nietzsche believed that pain shaped the spirit, and that great men were forged in the friction with life. Machiavelli, on the other hand, saw conflict as an inevitable and even desirable component in the pursuit of political stability and moral strength. The convergence between the two lies in the idea that suffering, tension, and confrontation are creative forces. But where is the line between virtue and cruelty, between courage and calculation? The reflection we propose in this video is existential, but also practical. Because today, more than ever, we live in a time of fragile truths, flexible morals, and fear of displeasing. By avoiding confrontation, we also avoid the chance to establish ourselves. And perhaps, unknowingly, we end up living a life that Machiavelli would call useless and Nietzsche decadent. The dilemma is this: avoiding conflict is keeping the peace or denying one's own power. So, get ready. This video will be divided into chapters, like a conversation between two powerful ghosts that live in the shadows of our daily decisions. On one side, Machiavelli, cold, analytical, merciless. On the other, Nietzsche, chaotic, poetic, brutally honest. In the middle, us, trying to understand whether life is about pleasing or conquering. Welcome to the conflict. Machiavelli, in The Prince, states that it is much safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. This phrase is not an invitation to tyranny, but to the recognition of human nature in its rawest form. Power, he argues, is not sustained by virtue alone, but by the ability to deal with instability, and this includes embracing conflict. For Machiavelli, the ruler who flees conflict is a fool doomed to fall. This view is supported by his notion of virtù, which does not mean virtue in the Christian moral sense, but rather the ability to act effectively in the face of fortune, luck, chaos, unpredictability. Virtù is, essentially, the art of confronting the world as it is, not as we would like it to be. And in this confrontation, conflict becomes inevitable. The absence of conflict, therefore, is not a sign of wisdom, but of inertia and omission. For Nietzsche, this idea resonates in another way. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he writes, one must have chaos within oneself to give birth to a dancing star. Nietzsche does not speak of avoiding conflict, but of embracing it as part of the process of overcoming oneself. Internal conflict, the battle against one's own inherited values, is what allows the birth of the beyond man, the one who creates his own values. Here, the conflict is not political, it is existential. Both thinkers, each in their own way, point in the same direction. Comfort is the enemy of transformation. Machiavelli distrusted eternal stability. Nietzsche mocked herd morality. Both knew that there is only power where there is friction, and furthermore, that truth is rarely revealed in times of peace. Conflict, contrary to what our culture proposes, is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of movement. Therefore, the first philosophical principle is clear: accept conflict as part of authentic life. To flee from it is to choose mediocrity. And at this point, perhaps Machiavelli would say to Nietzsche, your chaos is your tool, not your burden. And Nietzsche would respond, yes, and your coolness is your courage, not your cowardice. An imaginary exchange, but essential for understanding what is at stake when we choose confrontation over escape. In practice, what Machiavelli proposes is brutally simple. Human beings are unstable, fickle, and motivated by self-interest. The idea that simply being good is enough for the world to repay you justly is a dangerous illusion. In the realm of power relations, whether in politics, work, or emotional bonds, those who fail to understand the dynamics of conflict are doomed to be manipulated, discarded, or ignored. Machiavelli advised that the cunning ruler must be both lion and fox, strong enough to command respect, yet cunning enough to avoid traps. And this metaphor applies to the common individual as well. To be merely kind in a world that rewards assertiveness and boldness is to sign a contract with invisibility. In everyday life, we avoid confrontation to preserve relationships, keep jobs, and avoid arguments, and often we pay for it with our own identity. Fear of conflict leads us to silence opinions, swallow frustrations, and accept conditions that violate our values. We lose our place in decision-making, become irrelevant in the group, invisible in life. The price of forced peace is the loss of respect, including for ourselves. Machiavelli saw this clearly. Power is not given to the most just, but to the most skillful in handling the game. And in this game, conflict is not an accident. It is a tool. Mastering the art of confrontation, without hysteria, without emotional outbursts, is positioning oneself clearly in a world where everyone is willing to take the place of those who hesitate. Nietzsche would add, all growth involves pain. He saw suffering as a necessary element of greatness. A spirit that has never been tested is like a blade that has never been put to the fire, fragile, ineffective. Conflict is this fire. Not just external conflicts, but especially internal ones. Doubting what one has learned, breaking with inherited ideas, confronting fears, embracing desires. Authentic life demands ruptures, and those unwilling to face these internal shocks remain trapped in a diminished version of themselves. Peace, in this case, is a comfortable prison. Nietzsche would write, "What does not kill me strengthens me." And Machiavelli might add, "But if it does not strengthen you, it makes you disposable." This insight has direct application to personal development. Confronting an authoritarian boss, setting boundaries in a toxic relationship, saying no when everyone expects obedience. These are forms of conflict that require courage. And what's more, they require strategy. It's not about being aggressive or impulsive, but about understanding that confrontation is a necessary step to reconfigure unjust dynamics. The peace that comes from submission is not peace. It's forced silence. True development comes when you face conflict with coolness and clarity, as Machiavelli would advise, but with intensity and meaning, as Nietzsche would demand. Thus, the practical application of the principle is this: conflict is a field of self-affirmation, not an obstacle to success, but its starting point. Great personal transformations arise not from consensus, but from friction. In a world that values empty diplomacy, the individual who masters the art of fair confrontation stands out, not as a villain, but as someone who has decided to live on their own terms. And this, for both Machiavelli and Nietzsche, is the essence of real power, power over oneself. The most common and most dangerous mistake is to confuse harmony with virtue. In an age of social media, positivity culture, and fear of cancellation, the value of conflict has been buried by an almost desperate search for acceptance. It's believed that avoiding controversy, keeping everything under control, not displeasing anyone, that would be a sign of maturity. But Machiavelli would see this as weakness. He wrote, "Those who win are never truly hated for being cruel, but for being weak. Moral fragility arises not from malice, but from the absence of opposition." And this is what the modern world has produced: a generation of harmless but frustrated people. Without the courage to lose, nothing is gained. Nietzsche denounced this as the morality of the weak, a morality that inverts values to protect those without strength. For him, Christianity had taught the flock to call virtue everything that in reality was a sign of fear, obedience, submission, self-effacement. The problem, he said, is not the existence of conflict, but cowardice disguised as peace. Resentment is the bastard child of this illusion. Those who refuse to engage in confrontation end up accumulating silent anger, which explodes in distorted forms: gossip, sabotage, self-pity, cancellations. A world where no one confronts others directly becomes a minefield of aggressive passivity. A common mistake also lies in thinking that conflict is always negative, destructive, something to be avoided at all costs. But this stems from the inability to handle tension without emotional collapse. Machiavelli taught that well-managed conflict is a source of stability. Absolute chaos is dangerous, but regulated, strategic confrontation is what prevents a system from rotting from within. A republic without opposition becomes corrupt. A relationship without friction dies in superficiality. An individual who never experiences internal crisis becomes a caricature of themselves. Nietzsche would say that the greatest sin is to remain intact, because it is a sign that one has never had the courage to change. Modern society has created an almost pathological aversion to conflict. We prefer to keep up appearances, smile out of obligation, give in out of exhaustion. But the truth is, the more we avoid necessary confrontations, the more they grow silently, waiting for the moment to explode. The result is a life of accumulated concessions until it becomes unrecognizable. Machiavelli would warn, those who do not make themselves feared soon become irrelevant. And Nietzsche would add, he who does not confront his own demons will see them in the faces of others. Therefore, the great mistake is to live an anesthetized life without friction, without ruptures. The illusion of harmony is costly. It costs authenticity, it costs growth, it costs truth. Conflict is not the enemy of peace. It is the only real bridge to it. To flee from it is to give up one's own authentic existence. Machiavelli would see this escape as an opportunity for the world's strategist to dominate. Nietzsche, a symptom of the decay of the spirit. And us, it remains to choose which side we want to be on, among those who confront or among those who obey in silence. If there is one indisputable legacy of Machiavelli, it is the notion that true power is not born of brute force, but of ability to understand and manage conflict as a resource, not a disaster. In The Prince, he doesn't suggest that rulers create wars without reason, but that they know when to use them, when to avoid them, and above all, when to take a firm stance. The Machiavellian approach to conflict is strategic, not impulsive. Those who act emotionally lose control. Those who act by calculation take command. And this logic can and should be applied to personal life. Those who master their own fear of confrontation become masters of their own destiny. The key is to stop seeing conflict as a flaw in the system and start seeing it as part of the design of existence. For Machiavelli, human nature is selfish, unstable, and driven by self-interest. This is the rule of the game. Pretending that everyone acts kindly is setting yourself up to be outwitted. What he proposes is to play intelligently, knowing when to speak and when to remain silent, when to confront and when to retreat, not out of cowardice, but out of strategy. Conflict in this model is not a storm, it is a navigational tool. And the first thing to be achieved is one's own reaction to it. Emotional control, scenario reading, surgical courage. This is what distinguishes the weak from the powerful. Nietzsche would add an essential layer. It is not enough to control the conflict. It is necessary to wish it as an opportunity for elevation. Where Machiavelli sees the game of power, Nietzsche sees the leap of the spirit. The pain of confrontation fuels the rise of the individual who refuses to be tamed. For him, the superior man is the one who transforms conflict into creation. the one who, instead of fleeing, plunges into chaos and constructs meaning. Nietzsche would call this the transvaluation of values, inverting inherited meanings and forging new paths based on one's own experience. It's not just about confronting others, it's about reformulate yourself after each clash. Each conflict is a chance to be reborn stronger, more authentic, more free. Together, Machiavelli and Nietzsche construct a model of life that doesn't ask for permission to exist. The former teaches how to manage relationships, social dynamics, and the world's theater. The latter, how to master internal abysses, face existential crises, and extract a higher meaning from them. The Machiavellian path, applied to modern existence, is not an apology for cynicism. It's a vaccine against naivete. It's accepting that reality is harsh and that escaping it doesn't make us noble, only vulnerable. And the Nietzschean path is the soul of this. Conflict is the baptism of fire for those who refuse to live on autopilot. Both reject passivity. Both demand action, presence, and decision. Therefore, the true path is not to avoid conflict, but manage it masterfully, as a ruler manages his city in times of crisis. It's knowing that every confrontation brings risks, yes, but it also brings territory, clarity, power. Instead of hiding from chaos, one must learn to dance with it. Machiavelli would say, the prudent prince must prepare for war even in peace. And Nietzsche would smile, whispering, war is internal and eternal. Those who understand this not only survive, they evolve. And this is what life at its core is about, evolve or be swallowed. We have reached the crux of the matter. Life at its rawest is conflict, between what you want to be and what is expected of you, between what is right and what works, between desire and duty. And on this invisible battlefield, the only real choice is this. Either you take responsibility for your conflicts, or you will be enslaved by the artificial harmony imposed by others. Machiavelli and Nietzsche, in different ways, warn us of the same risk. Living without conflict is live without power. And worse, living on the terms of someone who already knows this game better than you. What would Machiavelli say to Nietzsche in this imaginary dialogue? Perhaps he would say that his vision of inner chaos is brilliant, but without practical action, it becomes useless poetry. Nietzsche, in turn, would retort that Machiavelli's political game is effective, but lacking depth, lacking transcendence. And perhaps the two would find a middle ground. The complete man is the one who governs outside and inside himself, who dominates the game of others, but without losing the integrity of his own spirit. A prince of the world and a master of himself. Someone who doesn't fear confrontation, but who transforms it into vital energy. This message isn't just for philosophers, leaders, or geniuses. It's for you, for every decision you postpone, every truth you avoid speaking, every relationship where you give in out of fear, every time you remain silent when you should assert yourself. All of this is a renunciation of your strength, your presence, your truth, and each renunciation leaves a space to be filled by someone bolder, someone who understood that conflict is the price of freedom, and who paid it without crying, without hesitation. So, think about your life right now. Where have you been too political, too diplomatic, too silent? Where have you traded power for comfort? Reflect. The peace you have today, is it the fruit of courage or cowardice? Machiavelli would say that an ineffective prince dies at the hands of opportunists. Nietzsche would say that a man who avoids chaos will never create stars. And you, what are you creating with the conflicts you choose to ignore? The value of conflict, after all, is in showing us who we truly are. Not in ideas, but in decisions. Not in speeches, but in confrontations. And when the world wants you to settle, to accept, to give in, remember, there is no greatness without friction. There is no evolution without confrontation. And there is no freedom for those who do not have the courage to fight for it. Conflict is the door. He who does not enter does not live. He merely survives.